Welcome. I'll try to follow up all these amazing speakers today. Really good conferences. I heard a lot of good information. People touched, interestingly, on a lot of things I'm going to talk about today. So let's get into it. The voice of UX is not your mama's UX, okay? This is an evolution of communication, and that is at the core of voice-based oral UX systems. And that's what I want to talk about today. So the first method, if we go back and we look at the origins of being human and the origins of human communication, we find ourselves at speech, okay? And this first method of communication was two-way. I speak, you listen, you speak, I listen. And writing came along much later, on the timeline. But when it did, what they've learned is that the earliest forms of writing, the style of writing, was in the manner of talking. It was still written in this two-way fashion, this two-way style. It wasn't until much later we got the Gutenberg press and we had the ability to produce publications that could reach far and wide. Later we had electricity and other technologies, radio and television, which enabled us to communicate to much broader audiences over greater distances, but in this new manner where it was one-way communication. Information was broadcast, we would communicate, and that's where that conversation would end. And thus, it wasn't even a conversation, but it was still communication. Then the internet comes along, and we have this whole new world of communication. It's sort of a blend of this two-way and one-way communication, because now it's interactive, and we're given tools like keyboards and mice and other ways of reaching vast audiences, but now we are communicating in two ways. And so now we're communicating with a huge audience of people. We have access to millions of other human beings. And in this new capacity, but in this new vehicle, yet in this the original form of speech, which is two-way communication. So today, emerging oral UX, voice-based UX systems. We mostly remove the visuals, the displays, we mostly remove the tools that we've had, and we return to this primal form of communication, this two-way dialogue. Only this time, it's between human and machine. We are now talking with machines, but we have this primal instinct about the way that we communicate with other human beings, and when we have that conversation, there are some nuances that we need to get into, especially as UX designers. This brings about many new considerations, especially for us. As Ash has talked about the ethics and the responsibilities that we have as designers and what we put out there in the world, we have to think about this very carefully. So let's explore this. Primarily the art of conversation, okay? As we return to voice-based communication, we return to conversation, which is different from just communication. Conversation, very important distinction. And conversation changes everything about user experience design. So verbal conversation, verbal communication, is our most natural and primal form of communication, as I just mentioned, right? But when you're talking about system communication, it's very awkward. It's not something we're used to. And we have very sophisticated systems that we can communicate with, like Siri and Google Assistant and Alexa. And we can have seemingly normal conversations with these machines. And it feels natural and it seems natural. But we have this array of other devices, like our Honda Odyssey, which isn't that old, which has a very clunky system inside of it. And every time I want to say anything, I have to push a button on the steering wheel, wait for a prompt, and then say something. And then if the automobile speaks to me and I want to respond and I want to reply, I have to go through that whole process again. And that's an important distinction because it changes how we communicate. It changes this natural, primitive way that we have conversation, but we now have these subtle variances and the awkwardness of how we have those conversations because of the systems that we're designing. But when you think about natural language processing, which is at the core of how we communicate with machines, how natural is that anyways? This right here, this phrase, time flies like an arrow, fruit flies like a banana. This is something called a syntactic ambiguity. And this is something that linguists use when they're assessing the dialogue and the dialects of various languages, and they're studying the evolution of communication. They look at something like this and say, how does this transpire across all these different languages? Like, how are communication evolving? And not just across different languages, but within one language. Because as our own language evolves, we have all of these other considerations. We have context, we have colloquialisms, we have slang. It's all this evolutionary dialogue that we're creating, and it changes conversations. John McWhorter is a linguist, and he has this TED Talk, Texting is Killing Language, JK. It's absolutely awesome. I highly recommend it. Check it out. He's an incredibly smart human being, and he has, in this talk, he talks about this evolution of human language. He talks about conversation, and he talks about something that linguists refer to as pragmatic particles. Pragmatic particles, an example of one is LOL, laugh out loud, right? And he talks about how what they look for, linguists, when they're looking for the evolution of a language, they look for these pragmatic particles that create what they refer to as markers. And in this case, LOL, he makes a reference to how LOL has evolved and changed the way we actually speak to each other as human beings. Because the evolution of LOL has evolved from laugh out loud, which was its original meaning, to a marker of empathy that linguists refer to. And he cites this conversation. I just sent you an email. LOL, I see it. So what's up? LOL, I have to write a 10-page paper. And he's talking about, no one's guffawing here, right? You know, there's nothing funny about sending an email, and there's certainly nothing funny about having to write a 10-page paper, right? And this is an evolution. This is how we communicate. And then we see this move out into the world beyond the technology that we're using. So you look at hashtags, which were originally designed for tagging content, for easier findability and indexability, right? But like my 10-year-old son would say, I've done something, hashtag like a boss. It's part of communication. And you in this room would understand, you know, potentially my grandparents may not understand, potentially people in a developing country that don't use the internet, you know. As Alessandra referred to earlier, you know, we're talking about ways of communicating which are unnatural to people who don't have that context. You have something like this hashtag where there's no relevance. My daughter, my 8-year-old, was texting me, and she loves this sheep here, this pink sheep. And, you know, that's this YouTube video thing that I watch, and he always says prankster, gangster. And so she's texting, she was teaching me how to text is what she was doing. And so she said, hashtag prankster, gangster, you know, and then she says, there you go, you're getting better at this. You know, you're learning how to text, Dad, because now you referenced, you know, this hashtag. And it was really funny, but this is something which is not a part, it has no relevance in this context. This hashtag does nothing for this conversation, but it's a way of communicating that we understand, and my 8-year-old understands. So when we're talking about conversation, a really important component of that is perspective. And this is really important, and I'm going to get into why this is important in a moment. In UX designers, we often assume perspective and we assume context, and we do our best to truly understand the perspective of our audience. But a lot of times we make assumptions. This image right here, this immediately, there was something about it, and I didn't know what it was. It took me a second, and then I figured it out. Sitting in a physician's office, waiting for the doctor to come in, and I saw this map on the wall. And this is a fire escape route. So this is really important information. You're gonna fucking die if you can't follow this map. This is not a board game, right? You know, and so this is really important. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, this is on the wall adjacent to the door where I'm leaving the room. Now, if you look at that map and you consider this very carefully, this is the perspective I need. Because it's on the wall and that's the door that I'm exiting, and I need to turn left, not right. Not like this. I'm probably going to figure that out. Many people will figure that out. I'm not doubting the intelligence of human beings, but I'm going to get into this idea of cognitive load, especially in situations which are, you know, paramount to our survival, and something like perspective and how that can impact everything about our moment in time. So here's another element of perspective, which is really interesting, and this bothers me all the time. I ask Siri, remind me to pick up my book at Powell's. And Siri says, okay, I'll remind you, and says, pick up my book from Powell's. And when I get this reminder the next day at 2 p.m., I'm going to read it, and it's going to say, pick up my book at Powell's, and that's going to make sense to me, okay? And I'm going to pick up my book because it's my book. But I'm having a conversation. In this moment when I'm creating this reminder, I am having a conversation with this machine. And when I'm having this conversation with the machine, there's a very important thing here that's happening. If I ask Ash to remind me tomorrow that I need to pick up my book at Powell's, he's not going to say, sure, I'll remind you to pick up my book at Powell's. He's going to say, I'll remind you to pick up your book at Powell's. Now, this is subtle, this is a nuance, and it may not seem huge, and weird shit bothers me all the time like this that nobody else thinks about. But think about the cognitive load that is required. As subtle as it may seem, it changes our perspective on this conversation that we're having with the machine. I'm asking that to remind me about my book, but yet the machine, is saying, pick up my book. And so there's this element. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's subliminal, but it's there. And it impacts our cognitive load, and it impacts our ability to communicate with the machine because we're trying to get shit done. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about cognitive load and working memory. Working memory, some people refer to its sibling as short-term memory, but it's not the same thing. Part of cognitive load is working memory. Working memory is the human brain's version of RAM. It is this temporary data storage that we have. And many, if not all of you, have experienced at some point in time walking into another room and going into that room and saying, I'm going over here and there's this thing that I'm going to get or something I'm going to say, and you get to that room and you're like, I have no idea why I'm in this room, right? This has happened. And that's a failure of working memory. And that's a perfect example of something that's incredibly critical when we're thinking about interfacing with a machine using a voice-based system. So something that I learned when I was researching for this talk, a very interesting thing. Researchers have learned that there's a direct correlation between cognitive load and our pupil dilation. Isn't that fascinating? You can literally measure the cognitive load of a human being by measuring the dilation of his or her pupils. So during this process, they wanted to use this measurement, and they wanted to conduct, they used this measurement system to research the cognitive load of responding to oral versus visual tasks. So somebody telling you, go do this thing, versus seeing something written or printed, or even on a screen that says, go do this task. And they learned that the cognitive load much higher when receiving oral tasks. So if you think about this high cognitive load, and you think about the ability for us and our working memory to failure, and you think about now, I'm interfacing with a system where nothing about it is visual, you now have something that's very challenging, something that UX designers need to respond to. And this other element of cognitive load, we choke. Athletes choke. Speakers choke. They forget what they want to say. It happens all the time. This is related to cognitive load. Sion Bylock is a professor in psychology, and she notes this. She says, choking is suboptimal performance, not just poor performance. It's a performance that is inferior to what you can do and what you have done in the past, and occurs when you feel pressure to get everything right. So she's talking about shit that's easier for you to do, that you do all the time, and when you feel that pressure and the cognitive load goes up and your pupils dilate and all these things are happening, and you forget and you fail and you don't do things the way that you know you can do them. And this is important, especially in voice-based UX, because voice-based UX are based on timers. It's a system that requires prompts for call and response. And when you don't meet that timer, the pressure is on and you can fail. This is performance anxiety. So this is something we're accustomed to in the origin of the web, right? You have this blinking cursor, and that blinking cursor is going to wait all day long. You can go to lunch, you can go to the pub, you can come back, wake your computer from sleep, blink. What do you want? What are you searching for? That's not going to happen in voice-based UX. Voice-based UX asks us to make haste. Siri. So you got to think about this. Like, how do you reduce this cognitive load? And you think about this element, like Siri, right? And you think about, and I've done this. It's a prompt, the timer goes, I hear the beep, and I go, remind me tomorrow to pick up that book. Shit, what was it called? Oh, and then she heard me, and then there it is, and there's my reminder. And sometimes I'll just leave them that way, because I'm like, fuck, I know what I needed to do. I know it's a book, but then I see the prompt. But this happens, this is real. Many of you may have experienced, if not all of you, this type of performance anxiety. And this is related to cognitive load. So interestingly, earlier, we saw another slide title, Path of Least Resistance, right? Mental models. That's how we as UX designers create this path of least resistance. This is how we decrease cognitive load. And so let's talk about that. There's a pianist by the name of Clarice Polk, and she says, people don't know what they like what they know. Love that quote. I think it's beautiful, and I think it's highly accurate for everyday living and for what we do as a living. Because we are creatures of comfort. We love comfort. And mental models feed our comfort. Mental models make the new seem familiar. I'll say it again. Mental models make the new seem familiar. Mental models are how we create comfort. Mental models are how we create a path of least resistance. Mental models help us decrease that cognitive load, decrease that chokeability, decrease that performance anxiety, which is something that's inherently natural as a part of voice-based UX systems. So think about this. Tesla, they released this first car, and their very first, this Model S, I think it was, unprecedented touchscreen environment, this dashboard. This just didn't exist in automobiles. And they were like, you know what? Let's take a tablet. Everybody likes touchscreens. Let's throw that shit on the dashboard, and there we go. We're done, right? And I'm not even going to get into why it's highly inadvisable to be fucking with a touch screen while you're 60 miles an hour. I don't know where the volume is for this, but so that's a whole other talk. I'll give that next year. But there's no mental model for this touch screen, right? And so they refer to a design mental model. They go back to this UI design model of skeuomorphic design, right? And they're like, well, if we make it look like a button, then people will know how to use this, in the car. And this is, very important. And what's cool about this is when we're thinking about, these mental models and how we apply them, search is a big part. That's a great place we can look at this. Search is an integral part of everything we do on the web. Search is a big part of our voice-based UX systems. We search. Search was a big part of the web just to begin with. We use the web to search for information. This is an inherent core origin of the internet. So let's look at visual, oral, and multimodal search. Visual search, let's begin there. This is something we're all accustomed to. This is where we've been. This is where we began. Lindsey Horan, my favorite midfielder in the NWSL, United States of America. Thorn, she plays for our Portland Thorns. Amazing human being. And if I want to find more information about Lindsey, and I use it in the search engine, I get all these results. I can scan this page. I can whip through it. There are mental models for what this page looks like and the layout and all this information. It's quick, it's easy, it's done, right? No problem. Now, you have people with visual impairments, and they can't scan this page. So screen readers, that's the alternative. That's the adaptability. That's what we used to help people and to accommodate, right? And so this is what a screen reader, which is distilling headers only, would return, okay? Now, is this reasonable for an oral return? For screen readers, they said yes, and this is what you return. But if you're thinking about new-based systems, which aren't necessarily for people with, visual disabilities, and impairments, then you have this whole other system where now lots of people get involved, and now they're really concerned, and they want to really make an awesome system. So is this a reasonable oral return? Probably not. So Google says, well, what is a reasonable return, on something like this? This is a multimodal experience, right? So you have Google Assistant on your phone, you speak into the phone, and you get the visual results. And Google says, well, for one, tiny screen, let's limit this space. Do we want all these results? How can we simplify this? Single return, the right information. I can probably guess they did, she's there, done. Now, here you have something like Google Assistant, which now crosses two modalities. So you first have your mobile phone, where you have a multimodal experience. So I speak and I see a visual return. And then you have the Google Home, which has no visual return. So it's a single oral-based modal. And now you have these multiple modalities that you have to go across, and we think about mental models, and Google says, well, okay, that oral return, the list of the headers, do we want to return that on Google Home? Do we want this list? And then if we return this list of all these headers when we're searching for Lindsey Horan, are we going to, how do we reference which one, and, where do we want to go from here? And so Google says, well, let's distill this down to one result, the most meaningful information, done. And then we do that on the mobile phone. Now you have a mental model for how you can take this with you across multiple modalities. This is a smart, adaptable decision that Google made to handle, this type of design decision making. Accessibility. We got to talk about accessibility. I talked about it. I touched on it with screen readers. It's really important. This is my son, Cassius. He is 10 years old, and he can only read and write a handful of words because he has a developmental delay. 14% of Americans, according to the Department of Education, can only read at his level and write at his level. 14% of all American adults are reading at a level That is the same as my 10-year-old Cash, who by academic standards in America is well behind the other children of his age. Okay? And that's a significant number of people that we have to accommodate. This changed his life. This voice-based UX system, the ability for him to go find Star Wars Lego minifigures on his own, to be able to find videos, to be able to just take control of this system, where every 10-year-old boy wants to watch, these great Star Wars episodes and whatever else in Lord of the Rings. This is important, and this is really life-changing. This oral-based US system that we're creating has an immediate benefit for people, for the illiterate population. Now, an important element here when we're talking about accessibility, we're accustomed to a visual web. This is where we began. Now, we have this we made accommodations for people with visual impairments, and we created screen readers and voiceover and other things, right? They adapt reasonably well. They're not amazing, but they do adapt. For hearing impairments, that's a much bigger mountain to climb. How visually do we accommodate a voice-based UX system? So something like this, Amazon Echo, they create the Echo, you speak, they create this thing called VoiceCast, and you can pair it with a Kindle, a visual, and so now you've got this makeshift, multimodal experience. I speak, I get the visual return, not ideal, loose accommodation, but it's an accommodation. And then just now they just released this Echo Spot. This is a true multimodal experience. So they're saying, okay, this is now an accommodation, for people with hearing impairments, and it's a great benefit to everyone else, right? This is a really intelligent UX design decision, saying this is going to meet everyone's needs all at once. And this, it seems so simple and it seems so obvious, but not everyone gets to this point, and they made a really smart decision when they went through this process. So let's talk about the language barrier. This is a whole other arena, and Alessandra talked about this earlier today. She talked about this language barrier. There are over 7,000 languages spoken worldwide, spoken, written, read worldwide, 7,000 languages. Devices can be localized, right? We have lots of devices, different computers, things. You ship the same device, to 10 different countries, and each one can be ready to go and localized in that particular region's language. So I want to talk about that. This slide's for you, Ian, wherever you are, Ian. This is one of my favorite football defenders in the entire world. He plays for Manchester United. This is his name. Now, I can type his name into a visual search engine, and voila, there he is. There's my man, okay? But this is not Eric Bailey, as you might pronounce it. He's a French man from Ivory Coast, and his name is pronounced Eric Bailly. Now, this brought a shitstorm into my life when I was communicating with my devices, I will tell you right now. Hey Siri, what national team does Eric Bailly play for? That's what I got. Not quite. Let's just try Google. Okay, Google, what national team does Eric Bailly play for? Eric Berry, we got sports, but we're not quite there yet. What if I add some context? What national team does the soccer defender Eric Bailly play for? There he is. Google knows. It knows that I search for soccer players. Now it gets it. There's some context. It can deduce all of this information and say he's probably not looking for Eric Berry. He's probably looking for Eric Bailly. I misheard him because I'm a fucking computer that can't understand Eric Bailly's pronunciation, right? So this is artificial intelligence using its machine learning, using its context and understanding that I search for soccer players all the time. It's my favorite sport in the world, and I research all the time, and now it knows. And the next time I ask it, without this context, what national team does Eric Bailly play for? There he is. I get the results. Now, this is really important because what this system, originally, if you look at the system, and this original search didn't have a return, and it took me providing some context, and then asking again to get back to this place where I want to have a natural, primal-based, comfortable conversation with a machine, it put the onus on me to adapt my search inquiry to get the results that I wanted. That's something for us to consider. That's a language barrier. So let's look at context. Censorship specifically, privacy, things like that. Y'all know this, or at least those of you with potty mouths like me, right? This is the bane of our texting existence, you know? So, visual environment, I can see what's trying to be censored, right? Now, I know what I'm typing. He's not a duck, right? He sort of, but let's just, I can tap that little X, and it's gone, and then, okay, now we're getting back to business here, right? Speech to text, where I don't really know it's going to be printed, not so much. This is a text I got from a friend of mine. Holy F, just hilarious, right? I'm thinking, that's hilarious, what's the deal here? And she says, I love the way my voice activation doesn't spell the word F out. What? I'm like thinking about this, and I'm like, I thought she was just kind of, being sensitive. I don't know why she would be sensitive with me and the cuss words, but she was just like, I thought, okay, this is happening. No. She said that the machine is censoring what she is saying and not printing her cuss words into the text message, I'm like, what? So what kind of device are you using? I'm going to use this in my talk in New Zealand. Effing droid. My droid is an a-hole, but that's a story for another day, So let's talk about privacy. Public spaces where privacy or auditory disturbances are a concern. I don't want to say my PIN number. I don't want to say my password when I'm talking into a system or a credit card number or something like that. I don't want to be disrespectful when I'm talking to other human beings. So how do we adapt to that? We have to think about that as UX designers. So Google Assistant, the app on our phone, great. You tap this little keyboard icon, suddenly you don't have to use your voice and you can tap. That's an adaptability, right? This is a good multimodal experience that's been converted to a single modal experience because of the context, because of the understanding that these UX designers had. And this is something which I've seen, and I know a lot of you have seen this. Over the past couple years, especially feeds, like social media feeds, you're scrolling through and videos started auto-playing, right? This is a newer sort of thing where, you used to have to actually press play, and tap on that. But now they're automatically playing. So this brought something new into the spectrum of watching these videos where, they're saying, people, it may be an inopportune time for audio to start just blaring out. If we're going to autoplay videos, we got to keep them silent, right? But then you now have these video makers, where people are, hanging out on the airplane or they're on the can or whatever, and they're just like, flipping through and seeing this video, and and they're watching it, maybe in silent, maybe looking at it, or maybe they'll forget about it or won't watch it later, and they'll miss it because it gets buried in their feed, right? So the video makers are saying, let's take this. Let's think about this for a minute. What if we hard code some transcriptions right into the videos? And I'm not talking about closed captioning, because if my hearing is fine, if I don't have any hearing impairments, I'm not going to have closed captioning on. But if these are hard coded, if these are printed into the video, now I can see them, and now I can watch a video on silent. And that's a good UX decision, and thinking about this single modal experience, of watching a video. This is really intelligent. So I want to get into this idea of personality and trust and control. And these, for me, are key components when we're talking about voice-based UX systems. Ka talked about personality earlier, and he talked about it with words, and words creating, this personality for us. He's absolutely correct. And it is paramount in voice-based UX environment, and I'll tell you why. Conversations change the psychological and emotional relationships that we have with machines because it makes those conversations suddenly personal. These dialogues that we're having with machines, they trigger our Darwinian buttons all the way back to the roots of who we are as human beings and how we communicate with each other. Right? Suddenly it's personal because we're having conversation. This idea of speech is very, very important. As subtle or subliminal as it may seem, the psychological and emotional impact of that is huge. And especially when you bring in the factor that we're talking to machines and not other human beings. So how do we get around that? Personality. Personality is a key component. It's a key UX component when we're thinking about our relationships with these machines. Because when we think about personality, we begin to investigate a lot of things in this personal dialogue. The personality of this machine, the intonation of the voice, and other nonverbal communication cues. Because nonverbal communication is a significant part of how we communicate, how we converse with each other. It's very important. When you're talking about our facial expressions, our pose, our stance, how we fold our arms, we roll our eyes when someone says some ridiculous shit. And this is, you have Wonder Woman. There's a famous this Wonder Woman stance, and Amy Cuddy, I think is her name, gives a TED Talks on and this whole thing on the power stance and how it changes us psychologically, and it changes the perspective of us when people are looking at us, and we're like right now, look at me. You all think I'm Wonder Woman right now suddenly. It's like this magic. But it really does. And this is important, nonverbal communication cues, which are undetectable currently by AI in environments where there is no visual feedback mechanism. But for what is verbal, we can begin to explore personality. That's how we can sort of play with these cues that we might be missing in other ways. But personality can harm as much as it can help. Personality says, Ricky Baker, anyone? Come on. This is New Zealand. He had to find his way into this. Personality says, do you trust me? Ricky Baker. Sorry, I'm done now. So there's this thing called the aesthetic usability effect. Please raise your hand if you've heard of the aesthetic usability effect. Holy shit, such a small number of you have heard. This is amazing. Every single person in this room needs to go look this up, because this was life-changing for me as a UX designer, as a UI designer, anything I've ever done. The aesthetic usability effect. This is the idea that aesthetic designs are perceived as easier to use, and that their shortcomings will be more likely to be forgiven. There was a study by the Hitachi Design Center on human-computer interaction in 1995. The results of that study, they noted this in their report. Users are strongly influenced by the aesthetics of any given interface, even when they try to evaluate the underlying functionality. So they were saying, hey, here's this interface, use it. Was it easy to use? That was the fundamental question. The pretty ones, more often than not, they said, yeah, it was easy to use. The ones that were ugly, they said, nah, I had some problems. This is very real. This is a very real impact, And this is because humans like pretty things. We love beautiful art. We love museums. We love music. We love each other. We love to look at each other's faces. We love to talk to each other. And any element of beauty, aesthetic is really important to us. And when we're talking about this in the realm of personality and voice-based systems, we're talking about the biomimicry of UX design. And there's this designer named Bert Brautingam who talks about biomimicry being at the core of voice UX. And there's this skeuomorphic layer we're talking about, at this core level of just how we interact. And then there's this, core level at the very center of this. And he says in this article he wrote about it, he notes, biomimicry manifests itself at a much deeper level than skeuomorphism, and concerns the how and the why a product solves human problems, while skeuomorphism is the initial and temporary literalism for human interaction with them. Personality is a critical component of UX, because trust, right? At a minimum, we need trust. I love this. Trust that UX systems will be usable, functional, and delightful, as Ash talked about, And this is the thing. Personality drives that trust. There's been research on this. This is a big part of it. And you think about that, and you think, well, personality applies to voice-based UX the way aesthetics apply to visual-based UX. Personality is the aesthetic usability effect of oral UX systems. There's a qualitative study on personality and trust and the correlation between the two. And Robert Sikora, who's one of the master researchers from this, who is directing this research project, he says, the findings showed that agreeableness was found to be a significant predictor of propensity to trust. The higher an individual's agreeableness and emotional stability, the higher their propensity to trust. So when we're thinking about this, UX designers, we spend all this time making things easier to use, making them more accessible and usable to people. But will personalities supersede all of our best intentions to make a system easier to use when we're talking about a voice-based system? Will people trust systems that they don't like? Just like they think systems that aren't beautiful, the UI, they're not very usable. There's an element in control. Human beings love to control. We are controlling human beings. And when we have control, we feel safe, we feel secure, and we want to continue on that path. And when we don't have control, things get scary for us, right? So control is an element of having some trust with a machine. And we have to have that trust because we love its personality. It's a great recipe. It's a great cyclone, personality, trust. So I want to read this passage from Old Man's War, a book called Old Man's War, which is incredible. I'm an AI enthusiast. I give some talks on it. By John Scalzi. He wrote this book, and there's this passage in there which is highly relevant, and I think it's very realistic about where we will go with these types of systems when we're talking about control. And it's a system, and in this particular chapter, this character is setting up his new voice-based AI system. So this is an oral UX AI system, and he doesn't want to use it, and he's being forced to use it, and he's like, no, I don't want any part of this. I don't trust this thing. I don't want it. And they say, well, let's design it so that you have control of the system. And this is what happens. Many BrainPal users find it useful to give their BrainPal a name other than BrainPal. Would you like to name your BrainPal at this time? Yes, I said. Please speak the name you would like to give your BrainPal. Asshole, I said. You have selected asshole. Be aware that many recruits have selected this name for their BrainPal. Would you like to choose a different name? No, I said, and was proud that so many of my fellow recruits also felt this way about BrainPal. Your BrainPal is now asshole. Now you must choose an access phrase to activate asshole. Please say your activation phrase now. Hey, asshole, I said. You have chosen hey, asshole. Please say it again to confirm. I did. Then it asked me to choose a deactivation phrase. I chose, of course, go away, asshole. Would you like asshole to refer to itself in the first person? Absolutely, I said. I am asshole. Of course you are. Personality, trust, and control. I think that's a very realistic passage. I think it's very realistic. You provide control. You think about this character in the book, and you think about this character, it's like just a real tough, grease monkey, blue collar, military guy. He's got these recruits, and he's like, you're handing me this technology shit. I don't want to use it, And then he names it asshole. And that makes him feel really good, because he's in control. He knows, I have the upper hand. I am better than this machine, and that's really important. And now he has trust. Because he can say, hey, asshole, what's the weather like later? And he can snicker or whatever, and that makes him feel comfortable. And that's a very realistic way that we can think about UX in the form of personalities and how that impacts trust. This is not your mama's UX. This is an entirely new landscape of UX, and it's around the art of conversation, personality, trust, and control. So as we move into this new territory, let us tread wisely. Thank you.